In this class, we are going to discuss about the Indian cinema of 1940s. Now the question comes, why 1940s can be distinguished? What was important in the Indian cinema history of 1940s? Is it only because there was independence and events like World War, or there are some other things which make the 1940s as important in the context of Indian cinema? 1940s play an important role between two periods of Indian cinema. First one was the studio era of 1930s and the new form of production that started to dominate the entire scenario from the 1950s. In 1930s, we get major and famous studios like New Theatres, Prabhat and Bombay Talkies, who used to integrate the entire mechanism of film production, distribution and exhibition in a particular centralized structure. But from the 1940s, it started to disintegrate. There are so many factors behind this disintegration. First of all, the Second World War caused major setback for the existing studios. First of all, as there was no producer or no manufacturer of the filmmaking materials in India, everything was to be imported to India from Europe. The war events disturbed this process of import to a large extent. So there was a scarcity of the raw film stock, and this scarcity leads to a shortage of film and shortage of making cinema. Eventually, there was a rise of the new producers who earned a huge amount of money out of the wartime benefit. They started to invest this money into filmmaking, which caused a major obstruction for the studios. So we get finally from the late 1940s the control of the entire film industry slowly getting diverted from the hands of the studios to the businessman, that is the exhibitor and the distributors. That was one very important shift in terms of the Indian film industry, because once the system which was once centralized now getting divided into many parts. The homogeneous form of manufacture which was there in Indian cinema for a long time and which eventually maintained a kind of narrative and aesthetic homogeneity started to be dissipated in different directions. We call the first form of manufacture that was maintained by the studios a relatively homogeneous form of manufacture used to maintain a typical centralized structure, and the second form which has taken place from the late 1940s as the heterogeneous form of manufacture, where the different parts of the film industry is being controlled and governed by the different sectors. So we find the film narratives also turn into some different structure. They produce some different forms, including the intrusion of the masala factor, that is the song, dance and entertainment sequences with a great rigor and as a great importance. So that experience is bared by the 1940s as an important mediator between the homogeneous form of manufacture, which was a characteristics of the studio era, and the heterogeneous form of manufacture which started to govern, to dominate the Indian film industry from the 1950s. The cinema of 1940s also brought a new sense of social legitimacy in cinema. It is because a new bunch of scriptwriters, directors and composers started working in cinema from the 1940s, especially after the dissolution of the studio era. Interestingly, this dissolution or the end of the dominance of the studio era opened up this kind of possibilities. We find script writers or the story writers like Munshi Premchand, who was famous for his literary endeavor, and writers like Sadat Hasan Manto, who worked in the film industry. There are films like Kishan Kanya, Apni Nagariya and Mazdoor, whose scripts were written by Manto and Munshi Premchand. And also there was another important event which led to the newer experiments in Bombay film industry. From the mid 1930s, there was political cultural movements like the Anti-Fascist Cultural Writers Association, which led this kind of cultural movement in the greater periphery. Some of the writers, script writers, musicians in the Bombay film industry became aligned with this movement, and their influence tried to change the scenario of the script writing and the filmmaking practice. This phase also becomes important in terms of developing a new relationship between the government and the film industry. The Second World War, as it made the filmmaking materials scarce in Indian market, government tried to impose new rules to control the filmmaking practice in India. They made a rule for the existing studios that if the studio or the production company make one film out of their 3 films supporting the war effort of the Allied forces, they will get benefit in terms of allocating the raw film stock. So we find a curious category of the films, that is the war effort film. Interestingly, the films which are treated or celebrated as the social realist films or the early era social realist films, most of them were made taking the help from the government and made as war effort films. We can name a few like Dr. Kotnis Ki Amar Kahani, like Dharti Ke Lal and Kismat. These 3 films make the scenario important as they signify 3 different aspects of the filmmaking practices in 1940s. Kismat was produced by the Bombay Talkies, and interestingly, its structure reflects the crisis the existing studios are facing to combat the newborn or new emergent spectators. Dr. Kotnis Ki Amar Kahani, it was on the other hand a very interesting experiment. The story of Dr. Kotnis Ki Amar Kahani based on the life of an Indian doctor, Dr. Dwarakanath Kotnis, who went to China for a medical mission. He served the Chinese People's Army and died on China itself. His story is made into cinema with the help of Khaja Ahmed Abbas, who later became a major figure in Bombay social realist films.
Oh, आप हिंदुस्तानी डॉक्टर हैं? जी। ओ माफ करना। आपका नाम डॉक्टर द्वारकानाथ कोटनिस। डॉक्टर कोटनिस, आपसे मिलकर बड़ी खुशी हुई। जनरल, पट्टी बंधवा लीजिए। अच्छा अच्छा अच्छा। अजय, ठहरो भाई। हमारे पास बंदूकें छोड़ी हैं, मगर ये तो हैं, इन्हीं से दुश्मनों को ढेर कर देंगे।
This one not only opened up international collaboration of Indian film industry, but also treated as one of the first initiatives in Indian cinema to make cinema with progressive themes. There was Dharti Ke Lal, which was made by the Indian People's Theatre Association as their sole venture in cinema. There was Nicha Nagar, an experiment with German expressionism and social reality. Nicha Nagar was made by Chetan Anand, who later came as a major filmmaker making films like Hakikat and Bazi. In 1940s, as we have discussed already, there was a rise of the new producers. I think one statistics can make the thing more plausible and more understandable. The number of the new producers increased exponentially during the 1940s. There were 42 new producers among a total number of 100, which collectively released 170 films. That was 1940 statistics. And in 1940, we find the number of new producers were 55 among a total of 108 producers who released 163 films altogether. And out of these 108 producers, most of them began their business within a year or two. So we can see the control of the film business slowly getting transferred from the hand of the existing studios to the new producers. This kind of transformation not only obstructed the way for the existing studios but also encouraged the new studios, new production companies to come up with new experiments. We have already named 3 films, Dr. Courtney's Ki Amar Kahani, Dharti Ke Lal, Neecha Nagar. 3 of these films released during the same year, 1946, and they are thematically related to a single concern, that is anti-fascist left-wing cultural initiative. The Dharti Ke Lal was produced by the communist-influenced Indian People's Theatre Association. Neecha Nagar was also influenced by IPTA and made by Chetan Anand, and Courtney's Ki Amar Kahani was directed by V. Shantaram, one of the major figure of the Marathi as well as the Bombay film industry. Courtney's Ki Amar Kahani, on one hand, developed a thematic which talked about the internationalism in Indian context, where we can find a resonance of the Panchashil principle, later famous by the announcements of Nehru.
Okay. Dissecting forceps. Scissors.
In Dharti Ke Lal, we find for the first time in Indian cinema a collective film endeavor. IPTA was an organization which used to formulate the ideas of people's culture in Indian context. It had several wings like theatre, music, dance, choreography, photography, literature, everything. And it also thought of using cinema as a popular mode of propagating their idea and their ideology. Their journey began with the staging of a popular play called Nabanno in Calcutta in 1943. 1943 was a year of famine in Calcutta. The Calcutta and the citizens of Calcutta experienced the death of the millions. The IPTA squad thought of taking this theme as a major narrative in their plays, in their songs, in their paintings, in the writings, as well as in dance and choreography. So the success of Nabanno was helped by them to produce a similar effect on screen. So Dharti Ke Lal was a loose adaptation of Nabanno, a short story by Krishan Chandra, and their understanding of the entire situation of the famine. Dharti Ke Lal came into being as a collective filmmaking endeavor by the Indian People's Theatre Association, and For the first time, it used the real shots of the starving children and the starving people trying to find some food from the dustbins in Calcutta. On the other hand, Nichanagar plays an important role as an interesting experiment with German expressionism and with the collective potential of revolutionary masses in India. The story of Nichanagar, vaguely based on the Gorky's short story Lower Depth. It was a story of two nagars, that is two cities, Uchanagar and Nichanagar. And Chetan Anand brilliantly used his idea of expressionism to produce a kind of spectacular effect to describe the difference, the gulf between the inhabitants of Nicha and Uchanagar. We find for the first time in Indian cinema the appearance of the revolutionary mass in its full potential. The song and rally sequences in Nichanagar show us how the film can work as a representative entity of producing a mass cultural revolutionary effect on screen. 1940s also experiences the development of the social films as a major theme or a major practice in the Indian film industry. For a long time, Indian industry has experienced the dominance of either mythological, devotional, or the stunt films. The social films, on the other hand, focused on the contemporary issues, the social relations, and the relation of the individual with the greater social world. The experiments with different cinematic forms as well as the contemporary political and social environment helped or somehow compelled the filmmakers to focus on the politics or on the greater social scenario. That was one major contribution of the filmmakers of the 1940s. Apart from the major studios, there are filmmakers like Mehboob Khan who started making films solely basing on the contemporary social problems. One of his films was Aurat, which was later remade as Mother India in 1957. Also, he made Roti, a famous experiment with German expressionism in Indian cinema. Apart from him, we find there are several filmmakers who tried to portray or tried to work with the social realism who later became famous like Gyan Mukherjee or filmmakers like Bimal Roy. The role of populism along with the social theme became popular especially in South Indian context. As of now, we have mostly discussed about the Calcutta and the Bombay film industry. The Madras film industry, on the other hand, was developing gradually. Interestingly, for many language regions, there were only one film industry based in Madras. For 4 languages like Tamil, Telugu, Malayalam and Kannada, there was only one film industry based in Madras. So it served the hub for making films in all 4 languages. And eventually, the events that used to take place in Madras influenced films made in all languages. In Telugu films, we find an influence of populism since the 1930s. There was one famous film called Malapilla, made in 1938, focused on the caste atrocities practiced in the countryside of the Andhra region. We find another important film and quite famous in the history of the social films of South India, Raitu Bidda, that is a son of a peasant, released in 1939, which specifically focused on the feudal exploitation prevailing in the Andhra and Telangana region. These two films are marked as epic films in the history of Telugu cinema. On the other hand, in the Tamil film context, there was Tyagabhumi, released in 1939, which is treated as one of the major films in the South Indian context based on the Gandhian thematic. Tyagabhumi was a war effort film, but later it was banned by the British administration, fearing its effect on the spectators. There are studios like Gemini and AVM which helped the development of the populist social cinema in the South Indian context. We find a film like Parashakti, which had a major influence on the Dravid politics in Tamil Nadu. Parashakti not only changed the entire scenario of the South Indian politics after, but it also introduced the famous superstars like Shivaji Ganeshan and scriptwriters like M. Karunanidhi, who later became the Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu. We find another important event during the 1940s which affected the development of the Indian industry severely. That is the partition and the independence of India. As of now, we have come to know the existence of three major film industries. They were Calcutta, Bombay and Madras. There was another film industry slowly developing, that was in Lahore. Because of the partition, the Lahore and the Calcutta film industry got majorly affected. The most of the exhibition theatres in the Bengal region fell into East Pakistan and the Calcutta industry lost a huge market. Same thing happened in Lahore. So finally we get, after the 1947 independence of India, only Bombay industry surviving, thriving and becoming the major face of the Indian film culture. Calcutta industry was crippled because of the partition and Lahore industry fell into Pakistan. And the South Indian film industry, because of a specific cultural politics, didn't join the race to become the number one film industry in India compared to Bombay. So the Bombay film industry became the sole face of Indian cinema. And slowly after the Indian independence, we find a new kind of populism gaining momentum in Indian filmmaking practice. The aura of Nehru, the aura of socialist construction gaining pace in case of film and its narrative and the aesthetic formulation. So we end here with our discussion of Indian cinema of 1940s. During our next classes, we will continue discussing films which made their presence felt and changed the scenario of Indian film industry in later decades.